Yuridu Maji, Ray Johnston Uinati, Wiradjuri Yinabaladu. Hello friends, my name is Ray Johnston. I'm a Wiradjuri woman. I was born and raised on Darug and Gundagutta country, where I have responsibilities to community and country. And as we begin this vital discussion today, I think that it's important to remember and acknowledge and respect that the world's first technologists are the First Nations people of this very continent, from the world's oldest continuing cultures, despite all attempts to erase them. So it is an honour to be coming to you today from the unceded land of the Tugagal people of the Darug Nation, and I wish to pay my deepest respects to their elders past and present. And I also extend that respect to all of my First Nations aunties and uncles, brothers and sisters that are tuning in to watch us here today. Now, in my everyday work, I'm a STEM journalist and broadcaster, and I see firsthand the impact that safe design within tech can have on society as a whole. So we're going to be talking today about why it's so important to make your product safe and also exactly how to do that. So why is Academy XI leading this conversation today? Academy XI is Australia's leading digital talent company. And not only do the team that help produce the next wave of digital and tech talent, but they also work on the organizational side of helping businesses plug their talent gaps. On the creator side, designers and developers hold the keys to making digital products safe. And on the business side, new global legislation is increasing corporate responsibility for keeping vulnerable users safe online. And a lot of the social impact that Academy XI focuses on is around helping people pivot towards a sustainable career who might not otherwise have that opportunity. Today, however, they are partnering with the feature film The Children in the Pictures to understand the unintended consequences of unsafe design for vulnerable online communities and what creators and makers can do about it exactly. We have an absolutely fantastic panel with us to discuss this today. And as I introduce them to you all, they're going to let us know a little bit about who they are and what they do. So we'll start with Tony Fitzgerald, who's the Virtual Services Manager at Kids Helpline. Welcome, Tony.
Good morning, or good afternoon. I think it's still morning my time in sunny Queensland here now. The rain has stopped, but Tony Fitzgerald. I am the Virtual Services Manager here at Your Town, and I look after our key telephone and online services, which includes Kids Helpline. And Kids Helpline is the national child helpline for children and young people in Australia aged 5 to 25. We're 24/7 helpline that supports children and young people any reason, any time across Australia. So it really is a privilege to be here with you all this morning, and I'm really excited about talking about safety by design and what we see at Kids Helpline and how that impacts our children and our young people today.
No, it's fantastic to have you here. Thanks for joining us, Tony. Next up, we have Catherine Sessions, who is the Assistant Manager of International Strategy and Futures at the eSafety Commissioner. Welcome, Catherine.
Thanks so much, Ray. Lovely to have the other panelists here as well to discuss this critical issue. And thank you so much everyone on the call for joining us as well. As Ray mentioned, my name is Catherine Sessions. I lead on the Safety by Design initiative at the eSafety Commissioner. For those who aren't aware, eSafety is Australia's and the world's first online safety regulator looking to help all Australians have safer, more positive experiences online. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine. And finally, we have Catherine Fitzpatrick, who is the Director of Customer Vulnerability and Financial Resilience at Westpac. Welcome, Catherine.
Thanks very much, Ray. And before I start, I'd really like to pay my respects to the elders or the traditional owners of the lands from which I come, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and anyone here that is attending today. My role is, I'm really privileged actually to have this role in a bank. It's to set the standard of extra care that we provide our customers experiencing vulnerability, and then to monitor it and make sure that we improve the outcomes and experiences for our customers. And it's also to connect with the community sector and other corporates and consumer advocates to say, what do we need to do better to improve our products and services, particularly for those who experience vulnerability.
fantastic. Well, we're very privileged to have you join us today. So thank you, Catherine. Before we do get started with the panel, I do have a lot of questions to ask of the panel, but we'd also love to hear your questions. So there is a Q&A function. You will see it at the bottom of your screen. Please go ahead and post anything in there that you would like to hear from the panelists. And in the time that we have at the end of the session, we'll be going through and asking those as well. So please don't be shy. We want to have as many of your questions as possible so that this panel can be as helpful as possible for you all. I also do want to flag that we will be talking about some difficult topics today. For anyone who has seen the documentary, you'd be aware of what we're speaking about, and there's going to be discussions around things like online harm, including family violence and sexual abuse. So please take care of yourself, check out or take breaks if you need to, and do not forget that Lifeline can be contacted on 131114. Now, we will kick off the panel discussion today with you, Catherine, from eSafety. What do we mean by safety by design, and why is it important?
Great question, and a good one to kick off with, Ray. I might use an analogy that our Commissioner, Julia Mangrant, often uses, and it's around cars and the need for seatbelts. You know, when we get into our cars today, we often take for granted the fact that we have a seatbelt there. You click it in and you just go. It's almost you're almost at a loss if you don't have it there. You know, you definitely notice that there's not that protection. And that's what it is. It's safety that's built in by design. This is how prevention, protection, and proactive change can all work in tandem to both keep roads and vehicles safer. So shouldn't we expect the same when we're talking about technology companies, given that they are now essentially an essential utility for us? Make no mistake about it, we know that the platforms know the harms that are occurring, and they've been occurring for decades. They know how the platforms have been systematically weaponized, and what we need them to do better now is to assess risks and mitigate the harms upfront by developing and deploying safety by design as a mindset across the lifecycle of every product, service, and platform that's being developed. And we at eSafety see that it's our job and the broader ecosystem to help them do just that. So some of you on the call may be aware that eSafety developed a safety by design initiative in 2018, and we wanted to bring the tech sector along on that journey. We knew that to make sure that it would be a meaningful and actionable process, we had to work collaboratively with them, but we also needed to work with NGOs, advocacy groups, and other expert advisors to ensure that a cultural shift would occur. The tech sector is diverse, and no regulator is going to be able to dictate or mandate their way out of safety protections and ensure that safety protections can be built for all. So we needed a robust set of principles. And this is where safety by design truly came to life. After 9 months of deep consultation with industry, we developed up 3 overarching safety by design principles. And I'm happy to share links in the chat afterwards if that's helpful for those on the call. Essentially, the principles are the need for tech platforms and others, online service providers, to define service provider responsibilities. They need to provide user empowerment and autonomy. And critically, they need to demonstrate more transparency and accountability to all of their users, particularly those that are at risk from diverse and at-risk backgrounds, which includes, of course, children and young people. We well understood that the principles needed to be actionable and achievable, and so we went about another 18 months of consultation with another broad range of industry. It was over 180 different organisations, individuals, expert advisors, to ensure that we could make safety by design assessment tools that would help industry move from this principles-based approach, and there's often a sense of principle fatigue, to something that they could actually implement, no matter their size or structure. So based on our feedback, we created 2 safety by design tools, one that's for startups, which might be of interest to those in the room, and one that's for the bigger tech titans. Our goal was to more deeply embed safety by design into the culture, ethos, and operations of all tech businesses, from conception all the way through to implementation, but also review. It needs to be a systematic process. It can't just be a one-stop shop once a product's released. We knew that we needed to try and engender a culture of innovation and motivate tech workers who already, many of them, wanted to do good and avoid tech wreck moments, which we don't believe are inevitable. We know industry is starting to adopt a safety by design ethos globally, which is fantastic, and we are seeing true cultural change. We know, though, that true change will only come about with a whole of ecosystem approach. And that's why it's so fantastic to see the nuanced panelists that we have on the call today who can give a broad cross-section of insights around how safety by design can be employed and implemented. We know our work is never done, and we're working with a broad range of industries to implement safety by design, all the way from education providers like the call we're on now, through to investors. But we're also working with the banking sector and have seen some really, really great steps towards safety by design being adopted. And we've made some steps in the right direction with the ABA, but also through the work that we've seen specifically with Westpac most recently in relation to microtransactions and other safety by design activities. So whilst I said before our work is never done, we're seeing some really positive steps towards safety by design.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Catherine. Now, Catherine from Westpac, there was a little bit about banking mentioned there. So I would love to hear from you now about how you identify and support vulnerable customers.
Thanks very much, Ray. I'm hoping that you can see my screen that I'm now sharing.
Absolutely can, yes.
Excellent. I thought it would be helpful to just give a bit of an overview about how we think about customer vulnerability and safety by design. We think about it in the context of financial safety and resilience. So first of all, I mentioned that my team's responsible for setting the standard of extra care. So we provide support for customers experiencing vulnerability through a number of different ways. We have our governance, so we have a policy and a standard that my team then continually refines and says, what else do we need to do that's better? In that standard, it says there are a number of requirements all across the organisation, from whether you're a customer-facing member of staff that might talk to somebody who's experiencing domestic and family violence, financial abuse, scams, divorce, serious illness, the whole range of things that can happen in human experience, to those of our product designers or our service designers who are thinking about how do we create digital first experiences, and then what does a product do? How does a mortgage work? How does a transaction account work? We also train our customer facing and product teams in the expectations that we have and how they bring that to life. We have 8 dedicated specialist vulnerability teams. So they have additional training and they provide support to around 30,000 customers each year, or different cases each year. To do that, we're not experts in vulnerability. We need to talk to people who have lived experience, and we need to talk to the community sector and other experts about what do we do better, what's our role as a bank, and then who should we partner with. So we have obligations under our Code of Banking Practice, which say that we need to refer to experts and external support where customers need that, and it can't be provided to the bank. And so we really spend a lot of time on those areas. The top vulnerabilities that are disclosed are financial hardship and scam. As you can imagine, obviously during COVID, we had a lot of people who struggled to meet their credit commitments, and the banking industry responded in spades with that. Scams, they've gone through the roof since this massive transition to a digital economy. So we're seeing fraudsters just really take advantage of everyone and trick people into parting with their money, which is just dreadful. Domestic and financial abuse is the next one. So what's really interesting is a bank can be one of the first places that someone discloses that they're experiencing domestic or financial abuse. We also see suspected or disclosed elder abuse matters as well. So they're a really big problem that we are trying to help support our customers through and take some more action on. And then serious illness. So when there is financial toxicity that goes with being diagnosed with a serial illness, and we are here to provide that support as people go through those circumstances. So what I thought would be interesting is just to talk about how we think about safety by design. So we know that our products and services can be misused to inflict financial abuse. And on the screen, you can see a number of different ways. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the microtransactions that Catherine mentioned, which is sending an abusive message via a payment description. So what we found a couple of years ago in the industry was that people were sending 1 cent or $1 payments to their friends, families, or people that they didn't particularly like, and they were putting messages in those transaction or payment descriptions. A large number of them were threats, intimidation, abuse, harassment. Now, that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable in people's lives, but it's certainly not acceptable to stick it in a bank account and to use a bank account to threaten other people. What I've been thrilled by is that the whole industry has said, actually, we need to do something about this, and each bank has applied a different way of responding. I'll show you what Westpac's doing in a minute, but other areas that we have thought about is, where is financial abuse inflicted? It could be forcing other people to take out credit. It could be restricting access to people's bank accounts or applying for credit in other people's names and then leaving them with that debt and trying to repair their credit scores. Going back to the abusive transactions, this is the way Westpac has responded, and I'll tell you how we applied safety by design in that context. I always love the helicopter that comes in at the end. So just one moment. What I would say is the first part of that video talks about the power being in your hands. So we are the only bank that has the ability for customers who experience abuse to report it to us, and then we will review it and then take action as appropriate. The reason we did that is because we don't know if someone has an apprehended violence order, for example, and is sending a message that says, "I love you." We don't know that that is abuse. So it's really important that we get people to tell us whether it's a problem. Not many people have yet. We think partly it's they might not know that we'll take action. They might not understand how that reporting functionality works. So we're keen to get more people to understand it and know that we're there to help them. But actually, safety by design is saying, how do we stop that abuse from happening in the first place? So all the banks have moved to block these transactions. We all have big data dictionaries that say these are the words that you are not allowed to write when you send a message. And you can see that at Westpac, we've blocked more than 43,000 messages from being sent. It's not the money, it's saying you actually just can't use those words, change the words. Which is really important because you don't want to stop people from actually sending money to each other. But we also have what we call day 2 monitoring, which is advanced data analytics that we run over the patterns that we see in sending of messages. So whether it's low value, high volume. I did read one series of messages, which was 900 messages in 2 days, including "I want to kill you, I want to kill them all." It's incredibly disturbing. Those kinds of patterns and that kind of language we're looking for. We can't detect every single bad word that people use. Urban Dictionary's been our friend, but we just can't keep up. So it's really important that we've got this pattern, we're detecting the patterns, and then we have humans that review those and then take action. And we will write to customers and say, that's not on, we're going to suspend your banking, or we will exit you from the bank. And you can see some of the figures that we've done there. What I'm really pleased to say is that we've only been doing this for about a year, but so far we've had about over 90% of the customers that we write to say it's unacceptable to do this on our platform. We will take action against you. They stop. And so that's been fantastic to see the power of what we do in our design and the way we've responded and the actions that that's taking to prevent abuse.
Some incredible insights there. Thank you so much, Catherine. Now, I did want to remind everyone watching along, please use the Q&A function down the bottom to ask any questions that you would like the panel to answer, and we will absolutely do our best to get to as many of them as possible after today's panel session. Now, as I mentioned earlier, for today's panel, Academy XI has partnered with the new Australian documentary, The Children in the Pictures, which is out now on SBS On Demand. And the film takes us inside Task Force Argos, which is a renowned Australian-based police investigation team as they go undercover on the dark web to rescue children from online sexual abuse. And the growth of this crime creates a huge amount of risk and vulnerability for both children and designers. So we're going to use it as a bit of a case study. Now, Tony, I wanted to ask you, what does the online sexual abuse of children involve? And also, you know, we saw in that documentary something called self-generated content and how it is becoming more frequent. Could you tell us what that means?
Yeah, certainly, Ray. And I think the first observation I'd probably make, and it's one that that certainly John Rouse observed in the documentary as well, is that sexual abuse actually doesn't occur online. Sexual abuse occurs in our communities. It occurs in our households. It occurs in some instances, as we saw in the documentary, in hotel rooms across the country. So it occurs in families. You know, one of the things that I'm not sure a lot of the community realizes that most sexual abuse actually occurs in family environments or environments where the child knows very well their abuser. So the first point I would make is that sexual abuse actually occurs offline. The online environment is used to facilitate the distribution of videos and materials, and also facilitates the grooming of young people and gives predators much greater access to be able to connect with young people and children in the first place, to set up that grooming that then lays that pathway to sexual abuse and sexual exploitation taking place. But, you know, when we talk about sexual abuse, we talk about a pretty wide kind of spectrum of abuse that occurs. You know, obviously one of those examples is what we would refer to as familial abuse, where someone very well known to the child is subjecting that child to horrific sexual abuse and physical abuse. We also have, you know, what I would class as probably a more subtle form of sexual abuse for children, and that's really what they're exposed to generally in the online environment today. The ability for our children to be able to access really concerning and distressing content, even just by accident, or in many cases not by accident. You don't have to search too far to find some of this content, is really what we see as quite a precursor to problems that might develop for those children as they become adults, because they're exposed to content that normalizes abuse, that normalizes inappropriate sexual behaviors, and there's really no handbrake or no filter or no mechanism in many of these young people's lives to tell them that that's not okay, so that when they grow up and they become adults, they start acting out that behavior on people they know, and they start acting out that behavior on potentially children themselves as well. And then we talk about, you know, that grooming behavior, which is really, I guess, the precursor to a lot of the abuse that does happen. And we actually see some of the things that are starting to emerge as a trend with calls we get to Kids Helpline. So, for example, it's quite common for us at the moment to get calls from young people who have been engaging with someone they believe is someone their own age online on an online gaming platform or other social media platform. And, you know, they're curious because they've been offered these strange gifts. They've been offered, you know, gift cards or gaming credits or you know, things like that, that then build up a bit of trust and a bit of relationship with that person on the other side. And then all of a sudden, unwittingly and unknowingly, they get themselves into a situation where they start getting requests to share images of themselves. And that could start, for that young person, for that child's perspective, fairly innocently. But what tends to happen is that escalates, and that's this concept of self-generated sexual abuse content. What's happening now is that predators are moving more from, you know, what we saw in the documentary, say 10 years ago, where they were generating that content themselves, to environments where the online world is providing them with a platform to be able to groom young people en masse and put them in a situation where they're sending them content because they think initially they're talking to someone their own age. And then all of a sudden that escalates and turns into extortion. And for that young person, they realise it's too late. They've already shared quite a bit of content, and that they're quite distressed and they don't know what to do. So that's certainly a trend that we're seeing at Kids Helpline. We're seeing more and more of children and young people contacting us quite distressed because they've got themselves into a situation where they've been groomed, they've been conditioned to a point where they've shared nude images with someone who they thought in their own mind was fairly innocent, was someone potentially their own age, and all of a sudden it's turned out not to be, and they're being extorted to continue to provide that information, to provide those images, which are then being shared worldwide on a number of platforms. And I think probably, you know, when I watched that documentary, at each stage of the I guess the history of what we've seen over the last 20 odd years, I've said to myself, and I've seen that, I've gone, we've had opportunities at each of those different iterations of the online environment to build safety by design into some of those platforms, and we've missed those opportunities. And the result is what we've seen is that we're now playing catch up. And I think now is an opportunity for us to consider, well, what's next? What's the next big thing, and how do we actually get in at the ground level and start building safe platforms before we even release them?
Fantastic question, Tony. I would like to pose that to our panelists. You know, what can we do to make our products and our platforms a force for good? Catherine from eSafety, I'll start with you.
Oh, there's so much that we can do. I mean, I think what we can do in the first instance is to go and visit Safety by Design and look at what ways you can, if you've got an existing product or services, make them safer. And if you are developing a new product or service, it'll give you the guidance, the risk assessments, the checklists, toolkit for you to take, work yourself through, and essentially have an opportunity to have a downloaded report at the end, which will give you the guidance and support, the third-party resources to look to, and, you know, a real step up in terms of bolstering online safety from the earliest stages.
And Catherine from Westpac, what would you recommend people do to make their products and their platforms a force for good? What have you done?
Well, I think the first part is to understand how they can be misused, and to really work that through and then say, well, what are the opportunities for us to prevent that or to intervene very quickly? So if you think about in a banking system, not many, we don't interact directly with children and young people from a young age. It tends to be their parents or their carers or loved ones initially. But we do know that there are some risks, and Westpac very publicly was fined by the regulator because we had facilitated payments for child sex exploitation material. We were aghast at that, so we now have a program of work to make sure that that doesn't happen again on our watch, or if it does happen because criminals are constantly changing the way they do things, we can intervene quickly. So we think about it, about how might customers exploit our financial platforms and products for criminal purposes and exploitation. And we also think about it in the design of our products and services. So how do we take into account the interests of children and young people and other people experiencing vulnerability, and develop that as part of the way the product works or is sold or is serviced going forward. So we have a checklist now that we're actually starting to pilot using safety by design principles to see how would that work for a mortgage product for a transaction account, for example.
eSafety, I'd like to go back to you for a second just to kind of dig into what sort of platforms are actually vulnerable to this abuse. I think there'd be a lot of assumptions that people are building platforms, they're not made for children, children aren't going to be on them, it's therefore safe, right? And I think that's an incorrect assumption.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we saw in the children in the pictures, content, all platforms that are online or online platforms and services are vulnerable to this sort of activity taking place. It truly is a global issue. Make no mistake about it. As I mentioned earlier, we know from experience that perpetrators will find novel ways to weaponize all sorts of technologies, including new technologies. And it's something that I think we really need to keep in mind as we move towards greater uptake of immersive technologies, for example, and the transition to the metaverse, where it's an even greater unregulated space. The harms are real, and there are sort of harms that we haven't really seen before. I know Tony mentioned the harms are occurring offline, but in the metaverse, they're happening online and offline. So it's a really opaque space that we're moving towards. We have a role that we call the 3 Ps, so prevention through education, protection, which we administer through our regulatory schemes, and unfortunately, abuse is something that our investigations teams receive reports about all the time from across platforms. They're often from a broad range of stakeholders, so from children and young people, as well as parents and carers alike. To mitigate harms, our investigations team work really closely with the platforms, and where possible with law enforcement channels as well, to make sure that content that has been identified or is being identified is escalated through appropriate forums, and to ensure that a global approach, as we saw in the film earlier, can be undertaken. As Catherine mentioned earlier, our best defence for future activity is to take a proactive approach, and this is where I think safety by design and equipping platforms with safety by design, the tools they need to consider for, as I said, risks up front to engineer out harms at the earliest stages is the best outcome that we can look to achieve. I think just picking up on something from your previous question as well, thinking about what bigger platforms can do, there's already a range of tools that are out in the public forum, that big tech platforms can pick up. There's tools such as Thorn and Project Artemis and others that they can take and deploy. And we know that that's an issue that we've seen to date, is that there needs to be greater uptake from a range of platforms of these tools that are already available. And there needs to be more proactive steps in measuring what technologies are truly effective. So this is thinking about, 3, 6, 12 months post-deployment. Have we seen harms surface, and are platforms, engineering those harms that they're seeing out? So are they assessing risks throughout the product cycle, not just after deployment?
Thanks, Catherine. Tony, at Kids Helpline, the clients using your products are children, so it's a ground-up consideration for you, I'd assume. How can creators make sure that their products are safe for young people in particular?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ray. And I think on reflecting on our own experience over the years, we've had to ensure that the platforms that we develop, that we want young people to interact with us on, are safe for them as well. And we're going through a process ourselves at the moment where, we're reinventing some of our own platforms and redesigning the way we want to operate and support young people. And first and foremost in our consideration is, how do we make that platform completely safe for a young person who wants to interact with us from the ground up? That's our number one consideration. And it's not easy. I'm not pretending for a minute that this process is one that comes easily to organisations wanting to build out new platforms. But I think there are two considerations for me primarily, and one is speak to the experts. And when I say experts, I mean there are two groups of people I'm talking about. One is the children and the young people. Consult with them, get their feedback right at the beginning of that process, because they will give you some brilliant insight into some of the concerns and some of the safety features that you might need to build into your platform. And I think it's easy for an organisation or a company who's building out a product to kind of focus on, well, who's our key audience here, and build their product for that key audience. But the second question they should be asking is, who else is going to be interacting with this platform, and what do we need to do to ensure that there's safety for them, even if they're not the key audience that we're building this platform for. The net result of that is, if you're building out a platform with the most vulnerable user in mind, the most vulnerable person who might use that platform, those safeguards and those features that you put in place are going to benefit everyone that uses the platform. And it gets back to that idea, for example, when you're designing something that someone with a disability might need to use, if you design that with those people in mind, that's going to benefit everyone. That's going to make it easier and safer to use for everyone. So it should be no different when you're looking to design platforms that, from our perspective, that young people might engage with, regardless of whether they're your audience or not, regardless of whether you're building that platform for them. And the other experts are obviously, organisations like eSafety and organisations like your town and Kids Helpline, who've got a lot of experience and can really see, from a user perspective, some of those emerging trends that are coming through. We at Kids Helpline, we tend to see some of that stuff come up first. And a perfect example I'll give is at some stage last year, I think it was, you might all recall that on social media there was being circulated a video of someone killing themselves. And we, even before it had hit the media, we were getting calls from young people who had been exposed to this this video because it had popped up on their TikTok or popped up on their Facebook videos, and so we could see those trends and we could really kind of get on top of that and help work with whether it was with eSafety or other organisations to give them the heads up. So I guess they're my kind of big pointers in terms of safety by design. It's really before you even start some of those intricate processes to build out your platforms, that you get safety by design on the ground floor and carry it through that whole process, because you'll end up with a better product.
Thank you, Tony. Now, what can you do if something goes wrong? How can companies report and manage that? Catherine from Westpac, I'll go to you on this.
So what I would say is we can't always eliminate all the risks. I would just like to build on what Tony was saying too around safety by design. One of the things I would say is if you embed that in everything, the other piece you need to think about is, what will you stand for and what won't you stand for? So as a banking industry, we actually had conversations saying, is it okay that people use swear words when they send each other information in a bank or payments in a bank account? Is it okay for them to use jokes that probably you wouldn't really want to show on your statement 7 years later when you're going to apply for a mortgage or something. Do we need to be censors? And we actually made a decision to say, we don't put up with abuse and threats, intimidation and harassment. That's the line in the sand. We do accept that people use other language, but some of it, it just shouldn't be in your bank account. So we're going to take a bit of a censorship role here and we're going to block it. That was a really good guiding principle. So I think what I would say is when things go wrong, we need to act swiftly. We need to work, as Tony and Catherine have both said, with experts to say what is the right approach, what are the unintended consequences if we take action on abusive transactions. If we do contact the person who's sending it, are we going to put a victim survivor at risk? If it's related to domestic and family violence, what is going to be the best way to respond? I think that's sort of the main piece that I would say to that question.
Thanks, Catherine. Now, Catherine, at eSafety, there's a lot of new legislation coming out around the world on this topic. What do we need to look out for specifically in Australia, though?
You're absolutely right. If there's one thing that we're seeing, it's proliferation of countries coming out now, catching up with eSafety, which has been around for 7 years, and starting to make steps towards really bolstering online safety practices, either through standard setting or legislation. And we're also seeing the same from the NGOs and advocacy groups that are picking up on our safety by design principles and employing them in a really targeted way as well. So whether it's for children and young people or for other marginalized groups. I think one thing we need to bear in mind as we're seeing these global developments play out is the need to really have a harmonized approach. We need to reduce the fragmentation that's happening and bolster the ability for platforms and services to, one, be able to work with the structures that are being put in place for them, but also to make sure that they're not falling through regulatory cracks. And I think one really great way that we're doing that in Australia is we've recently had the implementation of what's called the Online Safety Act. And that mandates for industry, an opportunity for industry to develop industry-developed codes. So they're led by industry and signed off by the eSafety Commissioner in the first instance. Look, if industry can't compile codes that are fit for purpose and really will support the safety expectations of the eSafety Commissioner, then there's an opportunity for the eSafety Commissioner to set standards. And those would be the first global standards that we would see in online safety specifically. So importantly, these codes really provide an opportunity for, nefarious harms in the first instance to be worked out, the ones that we've been looking at today and that were addressed in the film. But it also provides a really critical opportunity for industry to take proactive responsibility in this space. And as Catherine mentioned before, there is a lot of work that's happening from industry to try and pave the way, and that's what we really want to see.
Fantastic. Now we do have time for questions. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to pop it in the chat. And we are going to be starting with a question from David Anson, who says, as a parent and a tech professional, I am well aware of how difficult it is to protect kids online. What recommendations do you have for people of tools and systems that can be incorporated into products to help protect children? Who would like to take this one? Catherine at eSafety, did you have one?
I was going to say I'll jump in. I've seen a few of the questions in the Q&A and I think they might be pointed and come my way. I think there's a great range of parental controls that are already available for different products and services. I think there is, though, a large gap in education around these features and functions that are available, and I think that's a missing piece that industry can definitely deliver more on, is educating parents and carers around different controls, whether it's reporting features and functions, as Catherine mentioned before, whether it's user empowerment capabilities for children and young people when they're reporting to Tony, for example, or to others, or third-party services, providing links to those third-party services that are direct and in-platform, so it's easy to find and navigate. The last thing we would want to see is users, including parents and carers who are, rightly so, wanting to protect their children or themselves or others that may be experiencing harms online from having a blocker in being able to access information and support that should be readily available in app with direct links. They shouldn't have to go to a third-party website. They shouldn't have to find another avenue to get the information that they're seeking. And we also have the eSafety Commissioner's website as well, where we provide a broad range of information for parents and carers that we would welcome everyone on the call or anyone else, you know, parents and carers, to come and visit our website and to look at our materials, which we hope will help you feel more empowered.
Tony, I saw you nodding along there. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Catherine's advice there. That the only other point I would make is that you know, I think parents that speak to us get really frustrated because some of those safety tools that are built into platforms are very difficult to find. And I think the easier you make those things to find and put them up front, put them there at the beginning of a user's experience, because what that does is it gives a parent or a user confidence that actually you've considered safety within your platform and you're putting it out there as one of the core features of the platform that you're developing. So that's probably my own perspective. I think making it really easy and really intuitive to take advantage of some of those safety tools that you're building into platforms is very important.
Thanks, Tony. And on that, the second question that we have coming through from Leola Small is, if designers had to address one area to improve online safety, where should they start? Catherine at eSafety, I might throw back to you for this one.
I think it's a similar answer, educating themselves. I mean, within our self-assessment tools, we have what we developed as an online harms module, which came about through our discussions with a broad range of startups from across the globe who really had no idea as to how their platforms or services could be weaponized. They had no idea about the different types of harms that could occur, the ways in which harms have been occurring, you know, victim factors, perpetrator factors, a typology of online harms. And so I think educating yourself is the first step. The startup tool that we have, it takes an hour max. It's 20 questions integrated with videos and response options from a broad range of industry leaders that really want to share that information and the knowledge and experiences that they've had, so that other platforms that are establishing themselves or seeking to grow and scale can make sure that they're not running into the same obstacles as they had in the first instance. So educating yourself, going out there, they're free resources, you know, there's an opportunity there.
Catherine from Westpac, did you have something to add there as well?
I guess I would also add, think about how do you hold perpetrators to account? So what do you design in? Because we can protect people from bad behaviour, but we also need to help people who do bad behaviour stop doing it, help them or force them to stop doing it. So the accountability that we have built into our abusive transactions has been, we've put it in our terms and conditions to say this is what you are not allowed to do when you use our payments platform, and this is what we will do if you break that rule. And then we've followed through. So we've sent people letters, we've said we've suspended people from their online banking, and we have exited them from the bank. We've also, where appropriate, reported to law enforcement. We've taken action with other banks, etc. as well. So we are very clear about what we expect, what we don't expect, and how we will hold you to account.
Now, while I have you there, Catherine, we've had a question come through for you that is, because of the money laundering scandal, which showed that some Westpac customers were engaging in child exploitation activities, has Westpac upscaled the way they now profile and hire their staff, as well as looking at upscaling their electronic systems?
So it's a really good question. And one thing I didn't mention earlier, that since we had the matter through AUSTRAC and the fines, we have designed a program that we call Safer Children, Safer Communities. It's a very significant program that's now been running for the last 18 months. And we've approached it through the lens of human rights and then consulted with a range of external experts to help co-designed that program, both internally and externally. One of the most significant, or there's many significant things, one of the things we have done has been to develop a child safeguarding position statement, which is the first for an Australian bank. So that sets out the principles that guide our approach to child safeguarding, like safety by design. And it also includes one of the principles to set clear expectations of our employees, contractors and suppliers in relation to child safety.
Thank you, Catherine. I've had a question come through anonymously. Why isn't safety by design for technology legislated, especially given there are so many checks, balances and laws for other businesses and sectors? Catherine from eSafety, I think that you're best equipped to answer this one.
Thanks, Ray. Look, it is a really great question. I mean, when we developed up the principles with industry, it was really to try and help industry to bolster their own practices in the first instance. We've come a long way since then with the Online Safety Act implementation, and whilst that isn't specifically safety by design being legislated, we do have capabilities under that legislation now to ask platforms and services to provide additional information and to also meet what's called the basic online safety expectations, which are a ministerial determination of what the expectations of government are around platforms and services that are operating in Australia and across the world. So there are legislative measures in place. We really want safety by design to be something that is a proactive approach, giving industry the opportunity to bolster online safety standards in the first instance.
In the tech industry, it's renowned for evolving faster than regulation can keep up. We've all seen that happen. How can organisations keep up in order to keep their communities and customers safe? I'd love to hear from all of you on this, your perspective.
Oh, I'm happy to kick that off, and I think really it's in the interests of tech companies to do that, to keep their customer base. If they're not safe, if they're not providing safety for children and young people, then that's a call out against them. And as potential consumers of their products, then I think we then need to start making informed choices about whether they're products that we're comfortable and happy to use. I think from that perspective, it is really in a company's best interest to ensure that they're maintaining safety. And if they're not, then I'm not going to use their services.
I can jump in next if you like. I would say ask your customers, and then ask people who speak for customers that might not be able to ever talk to you. And what do I mean by that is children and young people may not have a voice as your customer base. People who are experiencing vulnerability, who are highly traumatized, do not want to deal with big organizations or can't navigate them. So you really need to speak to the community sector, talk to your own people. Everyone has this lived experience of vulnerability, and everyone knows somebody has been through it themselves, can point you in the right direction and can tell you the ways that they want to be treated with respect and that they want to be kept safe. So then other really simple ways is have a look at your complaints, what complaints are coming through, because that's a great litmus test. It is a bit late when you get a complaint, so you've got to do all of it all together.
And I absolutely agree with what both of the panelists have just said. I think there's so much merit in what they've both suggested. I will just add one more thing, and I think something that is really important is getting yourself immersed in a community, whether it's, could be relevant to your specific sector of the tech industry or, the online space, but global learnings. There's so much that you can learn from other platforms and services by working collaboratively. It doesn't just have to be data sharing. It can be a broad range of activities, whether it's engaging with diverse and at-risk communities and community consultation methodologies, as Catherine's just suggested, or other things. I think there's great merit in learning from each other to keep pace with technological changes.
Now, we are coming towards the end of the session, but before we do run out of time, I would like to hear from each of you as to what your final thoughts are for being able to use our platforms as a force for good. What do we need to be doing to make sure that's what they're used for? Tony, I'll start with you.
Oh, look, I think for me, it gets back to what I was saying earlier, and it's really about embedding those practices from the ground up in everything that you do, not because it should be seen as a burden, but because it actually should be seen as a benefit. It's going to benefit your product in the long run. So why wouldn't you engage with those principles, those safety by design principles from day one when you're building something?
Well said, Tony. Catherine from Westpac.
I would say there's probably four things. One is be really clear about what can go wrong and how your product or service could be misused to abuse. Design it out as much as possible, and then build in what you can do to support people if you can't design it all out, because we can't design for every awful thing that people do, but let's hope we can try and get most of it out. Hold people to account. If you're going to use a service or a product if you're going to misuse it for abuse, then hold people to account. And the more of us who can say it's not acceptable, we don't want to do business with you, the better. And then I would say be radically transparent and share with your peers and other industries. So when we first found the abuse in transactions, I worked for a different bank. I went to the Australian Banking Association, that's 21 banks, after speaking to the eSafety Commissioner, and we shared what we'd found. We agreed collectively to move on that. That's millions and millions of Australians that we are now taking action to protect.
Fantastic, very good points there. Catherine from eSafety.
Again, echoing the sentiments of Tony and Catherine, I think they're both really great. I would say also, obviously adopting a safety by design approach and ethos, but I think it does really start from the top down. So there's great opportunity to embed it across whatever platform or service it is. I think there needs to be a real cultural shift and uptake of safety by design. And when and how things go wrong, as they, inevitably, at some stage may go wrong, seek support and develop solutions internally, but as Catherine mentioned, seek industry support as well. Work collaboratively to make sure this isn't happening across the sector or across tech platforms. And there's a lot to learn from working across industries as well.
Absolutely, we should all be working together on this. I want to once again thank all of our panelists for their insights, and thank everyone who attended today, and especially those that asked questions. It has been a pleasure to be able to host this very important conversation. Thank you all. Now, there is going to be a short survey going out after this event, and we would love for you to be able to fill that out to help make these events as impactful and as useful as possible. You can watch the children in the pictures on SBS On Demand, and I would encourage you to do that. It's incredibly eye-opening about the incredible work that the Argos Task Force are doing, and just how they've had to evolve the way that they work in this area since the internet has taken off the way it is, and also some clues into the future about how they will have to work on it and how we can all help. So thank you all once again for joining us, and I hope that you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Ray.